The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. This is Thursday, the 16th of October, 2025. We're live here with Financial Rebellion on CHD TV. Good morning, Catherine, and good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you. It's good to be back. 2 weeks.
We missed you terribly.
Oh, it was nice to have a break, though, and I got to turn my phone off and be without that and be with family. So I was down in Dorset, which is right down southwest in England. And I was staying in a place called Shaftesbury, a little old villagey type place. And I have to report to you, I've got good news and bad news from England from what I saw. The good news is that everyone was using cash in that community. And I think would be horrified if you get, I mean, people were expecting cash.
Right.
It was wonderful. And there were just such lovely people. Like I bought this beautiful candle for my mum, and it was just wrapped beautifully and cash exchange. It just had this whole feeling of these people are united together.
It's intimacy. There is intimacy.
And they're not having, now the other good bit of news is I spoke to some young, like early 20s young men, and they're not having, they don't use QR codes. They are not having any of this. Because while I was over there, the news was brick card, digital ID. That was, you know, the older people didn't really understand what that was at all. And again, the older people like my mum, they've never used a QR code. They wouldn't know how to even begin to use one. It's really the sort of, well, my age group people, I think, that are just thinking it's a good idea because there's too many illegal immigrants in the country. Those are the people that are hardest to get through to, but didn't see them down in that community. That was more when we were out towards London. Things started to get more dire. I want to just talk about one other thing. We'll go back to the cash thing in a second. But one thing I was horrified. One thing England, even the sleepy town of Shaftesbury, have not got right. They're all talking about COVID. They're all testing. It's 2025. Why are you testing for COVID? They're lining up for their flu shots. They're lining up for their COVID shots. I mean, I walked into Boots, this place, where it's a chemist type place, and there was a line. This old lady came. She said, please make sure you've got enough flu shots for me, flu vaccines for me. And the person I was with actually marched me out and said, like, I know what you're about to do. You've got to leave right now. But that's how bad the situation. They don't get it at all. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't see anyone taking a COVID test anymore. Do you? Who would do that?
No, but it was announced that the president took a COVID booster.
Well, where I am, there are people with masks and people talking about going to get, thinking that they have COVID because they have a sniffle or whatever, and going for COVID tests.
I didn't see anyone down in Dorset wearing a mask, not one person, but they are all getting shot up, but they're using cash. So make of that what you will. I don't know what to say about that.
Did you talk to the young people about why they're using cash?
Yeah, well, they're petrified because they're hearing things like, oh, we won't be able to get our alcohol, or we won't be able to be free. They seem to be getting and reading through the lines of the propaganda that they're seeing on TV. So they don't want that at all. They want their freedom with their money. They don't want to be held as slaves. So, but I was really pleased to see these young men talking about it. I was quite shocked, actually, because I don't think I've had a conversation with young people over here with them saying those kind of things.
Oh, I have. I definitely have.
Right. But I don't really mix it too many young people. Maybe that's why. But I was thrilled to see these young people saying, absolutely not going to have any of it.
So we have a couple clips. Should we look at your UK Prime Minister disgracing himself?
Now, if you don't mind, I'm American now. It's not mine. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that. because decent, pragmatic, fair-minded people, they want us to tackle the issues that they see around them. And of course, the truth is, we won't solve our problems if we don't also take on the root causes, looking upstream to tackle poverty, conflict.
Catherine, can I just say something about that?
What a complete load of yaya that is. Just total lies.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So when you live in England or work in England, you go and get a job, you give them your national insurance number, which I guess is like the social security number here. And then that, why is it digital ID? You won't be able to work and if you've got a digital ID. Why is our national insurance number not okay?
Because what you want is a high quality database that is interoperable with the other global databases. So you're building a new higher quality system, which is easy to operate globally and integrate with the money and other systems. So in theory, you could use the national insurance ID or number, but it would you would end up with a lot more clunky non-conforming issues.
And so what is their reason? What is Keir Starmer's reason for the digital ID? Is it the immigrant thing?
It is to introduce total control through programmable money.
Right.
So, instead of introducing CBDC, we're now going to introduce stable coins and other privatized versions of CBDC that are programmable with money. And you can't have a complete control grid unless you get a digital ID and an all digital financial transaction system. So that's why you want to kill cash, and that's when you want to require people to have a digital ID, and that requires them, among other things, to have a digital smartphone or other mechanism that will ensure that you can do both the programmable money and the digital ID system. So you're trying to get all digital and everybody with the equipment to play digital. I would point out Bill Gates is now promoting an electronic tattoo, so you won't have to be inconvenienced by carrying a phone.
But how are they selling it to people? Because that's how we help talk back to these people that are saying it's a good thing. What does the average person?
So there are two ways that it's being sold now, and they've tried many, many different ways of selling it. The one they're pushing now is this is what we need to stop illegal immigration, which is total, complete lie. Okay. And if you look at what they're doing on immigration, so for example, we're going to talk about ICE and what ICE is doing. They're not stopping illegal immigration. We get reports from all over the country that people are coming in the middle of the night in planes into cities. They're shipping them in. That's number one. But number two, if you look at the enforcement that's happening against immigrants, we were promised that we were going to enforce against hardened criminals who are committing violent felonies in this country. And that's not who's being enforced. Cato just published a study that shows that 93% of the immigrants who are being detained or arrested don't have violent felonies, and 63% have no felonies. And it's not clear that these folks are really being delivered back to the home country because, in fact, you have an explosion of people in the business making money, right? So if you look at what ICE is doing, it's not doing those things that really would deal with immigration other than trying to run a tighter border, which they are doing. But you don't need digital IDs to do that. What you need digital IDs if you want to have a financial transaction control grid. That's what you need it for. And so immigration is a ruse. The other one that's a ruse is election fraud. Now, we had tight borders and we had successful elections before we had digital technology. Right? Right. So you don't even need any digital technology to have successful borders and successful elections. So, and what's interesting is the more digital technology you have, the more illegal immigration you have, and the more election fraud you have, because the digital mechanisms are so useful in the people running the criminal networks doing illegal things. So,
What's a digital ID going to look like? Like, is it a card? What is a digital ID?
So the first kind of ID that they're promoting is the real ID, and they are integrating that with the with your driver's license. So that, it's in a digital system, in a digital database, but if you look at the card, you get a physical card. They're now trying to convert state by state to now convert that into a digital ID, which is literally works like an app on your smartphone or your desktop. Okay. So they want to completely digitize it in the system. And of course, that makes it much easier to identify, surveil, and track everyone.
And it won't be children that'll be carrying these. I mean,
They eventually, and you see prototypes in Africa where, the kids basically get a digital ID and are on a blockchain from the beginning. In other words, what I've argued is that what we're looking at is a slavery system. And so you want everybody as they're born to have a digital ID and be on a distributed ledger where you can literally collect all the data that you're doing 24/7 surveillance round the clock for their whole lives.
I mean, somebody said to me the other day, who is in our movement, well, Polly, you need to stop fighting this because if you can't beat them, you're going to have to join them. You won't be able to fight this.
I completely disagree. So first of all, if you're a Christian, we have the victory, right? But the other thing is, if you understand at the root, this is spiritual warfare. And so a group of people are trying to get us to resonate with the machine instead of resonate with the divine. And of course, what we know is there's a lot of demonic energy being channeled by the machines. And if you're a Christian, no, this is out of alignment with life. Slavery is out of alignment with life. And you don't have to go along with slavery. And the reason freedom always wins in the end is people decide they're not going along with slavery. So the young men you talk to, they're not going along with slavery. One of the things that was the most hopeful thing I've seen in the third quarter was there was a wonderful reporter, very polished, very experienced, very sophisticated, interviewing a government official in Britain about the digital ID. And she just excoriated him and said, what you're saying is not true. Nobody wants this. This is control. This is tyranny. And she just lays the whole thing out. And I thought, the professional class is starting to realize that they're on the menu. And, when I came up through Wall Street, Polly, you could make a lot of money and successfully protect yourself from the centralizers and the control system. This is different. Now all the money you make financing the control grid can now be taken away from you when this is said and done. You're on the menu. And the reason I'm not going to go along is I'm not going to be a slave. If you want to be a slave, but let me explain what slavery looks like. You get a phone call in 2028 or 2029 or 2030 if they succeed, where, let's say we fail and they succeed. Okay, you get a phone call that says, Mrs. Smith, you have 3 children and we've decided you need to transgender your children. And if you don't, we're going to turn off your money. That's what this looks like.
Yeah.
Are you going to go along with that? Really?
But you know what worries me? So I watched the young people going through COVID, and a lot of them beginning were like, I'm not getting the shot. There's no way I'm going to get the shot. And they caved. And the reason they caved is, they really wanted to go on that flight, or they really wanted to go in that pub, or whatever it is. And I saw it in the military where the soldiers stood so firm, they were not getting sort of so bullied and battered and almost starved, is what we're hearing. Mm-hmm. Things happened to them and they caved. The people who say, I'm not going to get a COVID shot because of an organ transplant until the point of death, and they cave and it's in. Are they going to push these kids, all of us, not that we will ever back down, but those that are vulnerable, are they going to be pushed to the limit and cave? Because that's what's, I think, going to be ultimately.
So here's the thing. You're going to say this is the mark of the beast, and you're going to push people to the limit, and some will cave and some won't. And the history of freedom is there's 5 to 10% who doesn't cave, and they make the day. There's too much leakage. And that's why, rather than get to the point where you have to say, no, turn off my money, I'm going to go barter and grow my own food, before you get there, you need to get radical about using cash and rolling back the digital system so we can't get to the point where they can lock the door. right? So you don't wait until the hard moment when you say, no, I'm not getting a digital ID and therefore, I work off the books. Don't wait for that. Now start in every aspect of your life to use cash and roll back the digital systems. Rebalance the analog in your life.
Right. And also, as we said before, you will not spend as much money if you start using cash. That is for sure.
Right. And inflation is with us. It is absolutely inflation. I don't know if you just saw it. Silver in the last week has jumped $7 per ounce. So I just looked at it. It's 53.42 right now. That's flashing at you the message inflation.
Yeah, it is.
So
Lou's saying here's another clip with Carl. Should we play that?
so that's on stablecoins, and we want to get to that after we do the term of the day on program, because we're going to talk about programmable money, which is the key component of how they're going to get you. So we've warned about central bank digital currency, but the new plan in the United States is instead of issuing a central bank digital currency, we're going to have the owners of the Federal Reserve, the private banks, issue stable coins, but hook them up. They're set up so through Treasury you can hook into what I believe will be a social credit system. And so we have just written model legislation to stop programmable monies. All the states that passed anti-CBDC laws and passed laws to stop debanking by the banks. So any kind of programmable money need to come back around and pass what we're calling a Consumers' Rights Act to stop programmable money. Because what we're saying is you're a consumer, you have rights. If you go to the store and you want to buy meat, your money shouldn't force you to buy lab-grown meat instead of real meat. You shouldn't be able to be controlled through your money that way. So let's talk about, so we've got model legislation. We're working with legislators and activists around the country to get the states that pass the CBDC to come back around and pass this. But first, let's have Carolyn describe the term of the day, programmable money.
Yes. Okay. At the basic level, programmable money is a way to control people through the use of their money. So they can buy some things and not buy some things. But our definition in our model legislation is money or currency that can be encoded with specific rules and conditions that allow it to be automatically controlled and used according to predefined parameters. Now, from what I can tell, it could either be programmed the same way for everybody who uses it, or it could be programmed so that it the rules, shall we say, the protocols apply to specific people. So they could target a given person and turn off the money. The next part of the definition is that it has capabilities allowing for denial or approval of specific transactions. So imagine that it's programmed so that you can't buy guns, you can't buy cigarettes, you can't buy really good food, from a small farmer. You have to buy from the big guys. You can't buy marijuana even though it's legal. And you can't buy a specific computer game that's encoded in there. I mean, we can imagine all sorts of things. Then the third part is allows for user-specific restrictions on usability or on location, nature, time, or identity of transaction or parties to the transaction. So that means maybe your money works where you live, but if you travel 100 miles away, 5 miles away, whatever, you travel to a state they don't like, or a city that has freedoms that are frowned upon by whoever controls the algorithm, they can turn it off. And then it expires or diminishes other than being subject to ordinary inflation. So obviously, any money becomes less valuable when there's inflation. But other than inflation, there's no way to basically reduce its value. You wouldn't increase the value probably. And
But
then,
you could have negative interest rates,
right,
right? So you could have negative interest rates, so it goes down in value every day.
right.
Right.
And I mean, it could be programmed for you to pay your taxes, and they configure it. You know, and the final part, and these are alternative. Any of these make it a programmable money, can be used to implement a social credit score system. And a social credit score system is like what you all probably have heard about in China, where if somebody's a dissident, they can turn off his money, his or her money. If somebody says has something on the internet that is frowned upon, anybody who works for CHD, for example, they could turn it off. They could diminish the value. They could do prevent you from buying specific books, from going somewhere. They could turn it off for a particular conference. And presumably, as I said, you could do it at the level of everyone who uses the money, or it could be targeted to an individual. And imagine that it could be embedded in your credit cards or systems that we already use, and gradually to get us on that, maybe the credit cards have this embedded. Maybe the payments you get from the US government. I mean, the model legislation at the state level wouldn't prevent the federal government from issuing programmable money to pay you your Social Security or, any WIC payments, any other kind of payment that you might be getting, even refunds of your taxes, could be in programmable money.
So we have a video from the WEF that helps us look at it. Let's watch that, and then let's watch our old friend Augustine Carson's explain why he loves programmable money.
CBDCs would be a form of programmable.
As a form of programmable money.
And the one final note I will make is that if you think about the benefits of digital money, there are huge potential gains. It's not just about digital forms of physical currency. You can have programmability, units of central bank currency with expiry dates. You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it, or a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable, like say ammunition or drugs or pornography or something of the sort. And that is very powerful in terms of the use of a CBDC.
All our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
Okay, so let's get back to the digital ID. If you are going to track people's movements and you are going to track their traveling and their behavior, who they're shopping with, where they're shopping, how they're spending, donating, investing their money. If you're going to track all of that, that is a huge amount of data, especially if you have different rules for everybody. So we heard Augustine Carson's the head of the Bank of International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, say, we have the technology to enforce how and where and when you use your, and it's not your money, it's their money. They call it their expression of central bank liability. So if there are now 4,000 data centers in America, either built or being built, okay? And what people are finding is they're using so much water and electricity that electricity bills are rising around the data centers, and people are running into real problems with water and water shortages. What are those data centers for? Well, I'll tell you what they're for. Artificial intelligence is great at tracking things that can be expressed or simulated mathematically. And what is that? That's your spatial movements, so self-driving cars, and that's your financial transactions. And so whether it's surveilling your transactions or controlling your transactions, we are building the hardware and software infrastructure we need to make complex sets of rules and then enforce them through the money with programmable money. And it is our taxpayers' money that is being built, is building these things, and it's our water and energy, because we're all experiencing around the data centers skyrocketing energy bills that are paying to build the control grid that will be used if they are successful at instituting programmable money. And so it's very, very important when you look at the system, you see what the goal of the system is.
Yeah, it's quite shocking, really, this whole thing, and also how fast it's being implemented as well. I know the UK are slightly ahead of us, but can you tell us where we're at with America?
Okay, so every week we update a collection called the Fast Approaching Digital Control Grid, because the Trump administration has been moving very, very quickly to build it. And I literally got to the point where on shows, I couldn't remember everything. So we started to make lists and writing it down, and then we just started to publish it. But we update this every week, and it will show you all the different pieces of the system, because it is a big and complex system, because you need the data centers around the country, and you need the hardware, software, the chips to build them. You need the AI to build them. And then, of course, you need the Treasury doing what it's doing with something called stablecoin. So the new vision, Polly, is not that we're not going to have central bank digital currency. Instead of the central bank issuing central bank digital currencies, we're going to have essentially the owners of the central bank create subsidiaries and privately issue stablecoins. But if you look at how the Genius Act works, and we have a great article on our website about the Genius Act, and its implications for financial transaction freedom. If you look at how it dovetails, it's being set up for all issuers of stablecoins to dovetail with this know your customer and money laundering set of rules that can come in through Treasury. So we have a wealth of information at Solera on stablecoins, but I want to show you a little video clip about stablecoins. Before I do, let me just remind you again. A stable coin is a form of cryptocurrency on a distributed ledger, so no privacy, everything totally tracked and operated, and it is a crypto coin, as the United States is using it under the Genius Act, which is fully collateralized by a high-quality bank deposit or a U.S. Treasury bill, bond, or note that's 93 days or less in maturity. So it's a little bit, as a practical matter, like using a U.S. Treasury bill as a currency, okay, as a way of transacting. So it's crypto, which is collateralized by, as a practical matter, a short-term U.S. Treasury bill. And it's called stable because it was designed to maintain a price. Bitcoin and some of the cryptos are very volatile in price. And by something being fully collateralized in a high quality dollar deposit, it's expected to be stable in price. There are only, as of the summer when the Genius Act was going through Congress, there are only about 250 billion stable coins, with the biggest issuer being Tether. But now, with the Genius Act passing and the Treasury putting into place sort of the rules and regulations for a stablecoin issue, it's expected to explode in terms of volume. Now, I want to show you a video that describes the strategy of what's up, because there are two issues here. One is programmable money, and the other is an effort by the United States to dramatically improve the dominance of the dollar globally. So let's watch this video.
Stablecoins and the ability to use them for payments. What's your take there?
Yeah, Look, I think if you go, there's 8 billion people on the planet. If you could go to each of those 8 billion people and ask them, hey, you can denominate your wealth in any asset, gold, Apple stock, S&P 500, euros, yen, whatever you want. My suspicion is if you went and asked everyone in the world and they could answer the question without fear of political persecution, I suspect 5 to 7 billion of them would say US dollars. And so it's probably the single largest arbitrage ever in human history is to just get those people what they want. If you think that's what they want, then give it to them. And crypto rails are going to be the mechanism by which you do so. And so I think there's a massive opportunity to get stable coins in the hands of billions of people.
Okay, so let's look at what he just said, because this is very interesting. The Bank of International Settlements has been working for years to institute CBDCs, where every country's central bank issued the CBDCs in their country, okay? So you have every country doing their own CBDCs and rolling up and coordinating through the BIS. What the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. Central Bank just announced is they're not going to play by that system. They're going to issue stable coins, which are collateralized by treasuries, and they're going to offer them to basically 8 billion citizens, anybody they can reach through the internet, smartphones, et cetera. And they're going to try and get 8 billion people off of their local currency, off of the yen, off of the euro, off of the yuan, and get them onto the dollar. And instead of financing their local economies or their national economies, they want to get them out of their local banks and into crypto financing the U.S. Treasury. And in fact, the Secretary of Treasury said he thinks immediately you can get $2 trillion into the Treasury market, and over the next decade, by the end of the decade, you can get $3.7 trillion. So this is essentially like one company tendering for the stock of another company in a hostile takeover, but now we're not tendering for companies, we're tendering for citizens. So let me tell you a story. Do you remember when the Berlin Wall came down?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I was in the White House and talking with my cabinet secretary. I was in the middle of Washington, and everybody was very excited when the wall came down and said, it's going to take 10 years to unite East Germany and West Germany and get them all together, and we're going to have meetings and treaties and all this kind of stuff. Meantime, the head of Germany, the chancellor, simply offered Deutschmarks to the East German citizens at a very sweet premium. And within 24 to 48 hours, all the East Germans converted their money to Deutschmarks, and the country was unified in 48 hours through the currency. So in theory, if this is successful, you are going to see essentially the United States tendering to try and get citizens all over the world to come into the dollar system and help extend the dominance of the dollar. Now, Carolyn has a question, but before we go there, Carolyn, I just want to watch the Russian video. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, let's watch. So the Russians understand what the U.S. is up to. Let's watch what they say.
Америка прямо сейчас пытается поменять правила на рынке золота и криптовалют. Вспомните, какой у них долг. 35 триллионов долларов. В общем-то, это два альтернативных валютному сегменту мировых рынка. Действия Вашингтона в этом направлении отчетливо демонстрируют одну из главных американских задач. Они очень хотят решить проблему снижения доверия к доллару. США, как это было и в 30-е, и в 70-е годы, будут решать свои финансовые проблемы за счет всего мира, загоняя всех куда? В криптовалютное облако. Со временем, когда часть госдолга США будет размещена в стейблкоинах, США обесценит этот долг. Еще раз простыми словами, у них сейчас валютный 35-триллионный долг, они его загоняют в крипту, в облако, обесценивают и начинают с нуля. Это для тех, кто очень любит заниматься криптой.
Okay, so basically the Russians are saying, and the Chinese are saying the same thing too, that the US is trying to make it attractive for people all over the world to both come into dollars, but not just into dollars, dollars that are programmable and with surveillance systems can track and set rules on how their citizens, what their citizens can and cannot do. And so one of the things you're seeing, whether the BIS thinking this is not such a great idea, they like their system better, or countries around the world saying, they don't want their citizens attached to programmable money controlled by the US. We are now entering into a period, and it's going to start towards the end of the year. I mean, it's starting now. We are now entering into one of the greatest currency wars in the history of civilization. And the reason it's a bigger currency war than normal, and we've talked about the central banking system regularly doing resets, and we're in the going direct reset, is now we're talking about ending currencies. This will not be a new currency system. This, if it succeeds, is going to end currencies, and we are going into a control grid. We are marching into a technocratic control grid, and it is the end of currency, which is a absolutely dreadful idea. So, Carolyn, you had a question.
Yes, well, I wanted to point out, and your clip sort of brought this up. This is building the American empire, and we've been reading over years saying, well, the American empire is over, BRICS is there, and this through the currency is a way of establishing control over the whole world. But we can expect quite a fight back, I assume. I also wanted to say, when you talk about he talked about devaluation, if you can envision that the stablecoin is programmable, and let's say you have $10,000 in stablecoin, which is backed by $10,000 in treasuries, devaluing it means tomorrow it's only worth $8,000. So that would be a way of paying off part of the American debt by basically reneging on the contract by which you buy a U.S. Treasury, what it's worth. But can you imagine what the pushback might look like? Because I suspect there are countries in this world that don't want to be controlled by the American empire.
Right. And one of the things that has been indicated, and we don't have a clear picture of how it's going to work, is that the hope is to be able to do very generous lending through the stablecoin network once the stablecoin network is up and operating, so that you can literally get small business, small farmers, and families all around the world who are not yet in a dollar debt trap. The companies and the national governments are in a dollar debt trap. But if you have very liberal lending policies, you can get small businesses, small farmers, and families into a dollar debt trap and deeply dependent on earning dollars to pay off their dollar debt. So lest you think I'm joking about this, there is a perfectly horrible movie. I'm not recommending this as an entertainment experience, but simply as predictive programming to understand what's happening with stablecoins. There's a movie called G20. Viola Davis is an ex-Marine who's the president of the United States. It was movie of the week, Lou, on the Solari Report, so you can get a really great picture of the movie poster. And in movie of the week at Solari. Anyway, so Viola Davis is the president, and she goes to the G20 meeting in South Africa. And I would point out that the G20 meeting this year is in South Africa in November. And so she goes to the G20 meeting, and there is literally a violent war between the folks, the establishment promoting stablecoins, and a group of terrorists promoting a different kind of crypto. Anyway, but her plan is to persuade G20 to let the United States issue stablecoins and lend to small farmers all around the world, which is, a great way to control food. And as we know, it's very difficult to control money, even with programmable money, if you don't control food. People can always create their own community currencies as long as they can grow food and they have water and energy. So anyway, but if it's very interesting to watch G20, Polly, because you know how long it takes to plan and finance and film and produce and distribute a movie. I was on a plane flying across the Atlantic in the summer, and I saw this movie and watched it, and I was like, oh my God, this is stablecoin marketing, and they've been working on this for years. So when I say the Trump administration is rolling out the control grid fast, it's a lot of money and planning that's gone into this effort.
So we've got like 18 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to say on this, or should we start to really talk about, because I know the viewers like, okay, we're going to use cash. What else can we do?
Okay, so we just had a legislative briefing. If you go to our Financial Transaction Freedom website and you look at the Team Cash, there are lots of great ideas. Of course, one of the big ones coming up is Cash Halloween, okay? Don't give out candy, give out dollar bills with little stickers that show you how to, use cash and why you should use cash. Anyway, but check out the Financial Transaction Freedom and all the wonderful ideas on cash. We have now written model legislation for different states. It's been adopted to different states, but we have a generic version for your state. It's time for your state legislature, particularly the ones that stop the debanking and stop the CBDC, to now pass, we're calling it consumer rights legislation to stop programmable money. And if your representative or senator or lobbyist or any activist in your area want to get that sponsored in your state, you can let us know through the Financial Transaction Freedom website. Elizabeth Murphy runs our effort. Her contact information is there. Contact her and she will get you a copy of the generic legislation. And we're here to help support you in getting that passed, because you do need state action to protect you against programmable money. Okay, so there are many other things you can do. You can read all about it at Financial Transaction Freedom. I do want to make sure we take the time to talk about what's happening with ICE. We have a lot of questions on what's happening in immigration enforcement, and I think it's important to share those questions, and we could use tremendous intelligence and input from people around the country as to what they're seeing, because, we need a very rich personal reporting and intelligence network to understand what's really happening. But we're deeply concerned about what's happening because it's not what's supposed to be happening as far as we can tell. So I'd like to talk about that. Before I do, any other questions on financial transaction freedom?
Well, just one question actually. So tying this back to children, if we don't fight this now, then your children or grandchildren are going to have a pretty horrific future, and that's the bottom line.
So everything we fought for food freedom or health freedom will be rolled back. In other words, every freedom you fought for, First Amendment, Second Amendment, food freedom, health freedom, can all be rolled back. You have total central bank, central control of the money. This is the mega rich versus everyone else. And the mega rich will be able to tell you, they'll be able to raise your taxes arbitrarily. They will be able, once the bankers can set the laws and rules in the money, they don't need legislatures. They don't need executive branches other than enforcement. So we're talking about a coup d'etat here. And it's a coup d'etat where everything you have no longer belongs to you. So when the World Economic Forum says it's 2030 and you have no assets, they're totally serious about that. But it's not just you have no assets. They set, what your health care policies are. They can mandate anything. They say you're locked down for the rest of your life. In a 15-minute city, you're locked down. Your money won't work outside the 15-minute city. This is complete control.
Okay, so all right, thank you.
Can I put a plug in for, we are going to be at the Weston Price Foundation conference this weekend. I'm leaving today, and we'll have a table there, and we'll have some of the materials that working with state legislators, things like that, that you can get for 10% off. and have a promotion to subscribe at a 10% discount. And then we will also have a table at Children's Health Defense, and we're having a get together of Solari subscribers at Weston Price on Saturday, and Catherine will be speaking both at Weston Price and at the CHD convention. So we hope people will, moment of truth, yes. So
it's going to be great. I can't wait.
It is going to be great. What an all-star cast. It's unbelievable.
Great lineup, and there's more than just you're seeing there. And just also while we're on it, we do want people to subscribe to Solari. Tell us how we can do that.
Solari.com, there's a shop and you can subscribe. We periodically have specials, but anytime you can subscribe, and you get all sorts of benefits. Our website is public, but there's a paywall. And so people who are not subscribing don't know all the things that are there until they subscribe. So we have something called Connect, where you can sign up for various groups of subscribers by topic or by location. We have an Ask Catherine that I do with Jennifer. We have Health Corner once a month, Tech Corner once a month, and then Catherine and I do it twice a month. And Money and Markets is probably the most popular thing, and that is the first 3 weeks of the month, or everything other than the last week of the month. Catherine records with John Titus, who is an attorney and unbelievably knowledgeable about, he gives us the legal spin on current events, and they talk about geopolitical matters and the markets. So that's probably the most popular aspect of it.
So I would never have figured out what was going on with ICE if John hadn't gotten into the courts, dug out all the legal documents, and really drilled down. Now, I think I sent one to you, Polly. Did you get our little Faraday bag for your phone?
No, I have not. But it's like when you send me anything, Catherine.
I know. Would you, Carolyn, would you ask Nita to send Polly another one?
Well, thank you. So we just don't seem to be able to get things between us. But just before you move on to ICE, the big question is, can people subscribe paying cash to Solari?
Absolutely.
Certainly, if they come to the conferences, I have.
Right, they can always pay
cash.
We have a whole program called Cash Coin. You can even drive through Hickory Valley and drop money off at Hickory Valley, and the Hickory Valley grocery store will accept cash for us. So now we don't recommend you sending cash in the mail, but you can send them money, or you go to the post office, send a money order,
or
you
check.
Can send a check. And some people do mail cash. I just think it's risky.
It is risky.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, should we talk about ICE now? Because I'm intrigued.
Okay, so under the law, if and let's talk about the Constitution and using the military domestically. If federal officers are in a location implementing federal law and went into violent opposition, it is considered acceptable to send in the National Guard. Okay, and the military. So it's good to provide enforcement when federal officials are threatened when trying to implement federal law. Okay, it is not lawful to send the military in to deal with local crime. Okay, that's not okay. That is a violation, I would argue, of the Constitution. Now, if you look at what is happening in ICE, we drilled down and looked at the courts have ruled that the federal government was crossed the line and didn't have standing to send a National Guard in both Illinois and Portland. And if you read the judge's decision and you read the documents, what I would say is the argument that there was serious opposition was, first of all, trumped up, or was theater, somebody financed that theater. It was contrived one way or another. And there was no, in my opinion, there was no legal basis to send in the National Guard in the sense that federal officers were at risk. Now, if you look at the conduct of ICE, it appears that they are intentionally doing things to create local opposition. They are being unnecessarily and particularly brutal. Now, One of the things that's important to understand is if you look at the money that the government has poured into building surveillance and data systems since 1990, the early 90s, there is, I call it the data beast. The data beast has more data on you in real time than you do, okay? And there is no reason that ICE or any other federal officer should drop into a building in Chicago and not have superb intelligence on every person in that building. Okay, now, one of the things we saw in Chicago was ICE literally drop in a team. They did warrantless searches, tied up people and their kids, including US citizens. So you're doing warrantless searches in a building, and that warrantless, kicking in the door, warrantless searches, tying people and their children up in the middle of the night, including US citizens. Okay? And that is a complete violation of multiple laws, Constitution and other. And they know it is impossible that ICE cannot get the data to tell them who is a citizen and who is not a citizen before they go in. This can't happen unless you are trying to, and my fear is establish a precedent of doing warrantless searches and detention of US citizens. And it's not okay. I mean, and they're making the argument that they need to do it on immigration. And that's that if you look at what they can do with their data systems and targeting who's illegal and who's not, that's not okay. Now, we were sold the argument that what we're going to do is we're going to focus on hardened criminals and identify those people who have come across with the cartels who are doing illegal activities who are hardened criminals. Cato just published a study showing that 63% of the people being rounded up by ICE as of this summer are don't have felony records, and 93% don't have violent felony records. So whoever we're rounding up, we're not rounding up the hardened criminals. And so the question is, what is the point of this? What is the point of doing warrantless searches on citizens? What is the point of specifically claiming that you have, creating a theater and then claiming you have opposition, which is not really serious? In other words, we're watching a game going on, and I would suggest to you it is not a legitimate enforcement of immigration. Now, here's what's interesting. When I talk to people, and I just came through and did a series of events in Tennessee, when I talk to people, they're like, yeah, this is great. We're getting those illegal immigrants out. Well, first of all, there are 30 million illegal immigrants in the country. If you round them all up and send them back to the countries that they came from, the entire U.S. economy will implode. That's number one. And if you look at the logistics of rounding up and sending 30 million people home, it's not going to happen. And that was one of the reasons we said we were going to focus on closing the borders and then rounding up the hardened criminals and sending them back. That's not what's happening. That is not what's happening. And if you look at what's happening is, I think we are in danger of setting terrible precedents that make it easy to round up, do warrantless searches on citizens and round up innocent people and basically detain them in complete violation of due process. So if you look at how these techniques are and can be used on citizens, this is not okay, what is happening. It's very interesting. Chris Christie just gave a interesting interview on one of the networks. Chris Christie is the former governor of New Jersey and a very respected Republican and former prosecutor. And he said the Department of Justice is no longer a prosecuting entity. It's basically a capo regime that works for the Don and goes out and does a hit on whatever the Don says. Now, one of the biggest issues right now in Washington is the pressure to get the Epstein files made public, as was promised by the administration. Meantime, the president's polls, his numbers are dropping dramatically in the polls, And the more they drop, the more you hear all these headlines about we're being tough on violent crime. But if you look at the real details of what they're being tough on, they're making headlines, but there's no real effort. Now, let me just jump to crime. So a lot of the poll support for doing these kinds of things, or people are tired of the cities being in really bad conditions. So if you look at the deterioration in the cities where they've defunded the police, people are fed up with the crime and the dysfunction. And, somebody said it really well the other day. We can't succeed as a country if our cities are failing. And they're right. And people want to see action taken. And so it gets great headlines when the president says, oh, we're dropping in this team and we're going to be tough on crime. The federal government, first of all, I would argue that's not legal under the Constitution. But what I know as a former government official is the government has hundreds and hundreds of tools that are effective in stopping all of that in the cities. They're not using any of it. All the things they could and should be doing under the law to stop this kind of dysfunction and the failure of cities, they're not doing any of it. And one of the things they could do is round up the hardened criminals and really get them out, but they're not doing it. So all the things we could do, and we have the power legally to do to stop criminal, and crime in cities and the failure of the cities, we're not doing those things. So the story doesn't work. And what you're seeing, in my opinion, is a theater that is designed to achieve some goals, one of which is to establish precedents, including destroying the First Amendment, possibly the Second Amendment, and certainly due process. So, Carolyn, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, Polly pointed out there might be people listening to this who don't see the videos, and we showed videos of police or of military people, and many of them had masks that are black and go all the way up to their eyes. Imagine how intimidating that is. And they've got very creepy looking guns, scary looking guns, and they're pushing people who are protesting. And I noticed in one of our videos, there it is for those who can see it, that guy did a flip when the military was pushing him. He did a perfect flip, and supposed protester. You can imagine that this could have been someone who is planted in there to be engaging in the violent activities, as was alleged in the January 6th situation, that there were either FBI or other people in there at the behest of the government to make things worse than they would otherwise be. So it's just interesting for those of you who are.
I think a lot of the protesters are paid or professional, and this is basically a theater. It's a show. Now, if you look at some of the behavior that's, you can see promotion of behavior designed to encourage protests, but it seems to me a lot of this is theater, and it's very disturbing. We told one story on Money and Markets of someone who'd been arrested working at a car wash. His legs were broken during the arrest. It's not clear how it happened. He was put in a hospital for 37 days under an anonymous name. And after 37 days, they still hadn't established his legal, was he a citizen, was he not a citizen? But it took quite a while for his family to find him and get him an attorney. And they did this all without a warrant or any kind of due process. Now, I had a little fight with somebody in Tennessee. They said, as far as I'm concerned, these people have no rights. And so they shouldn't have any rights, and because they're assuming that the people being rounded up are the hardened criminals who've been so frustrating to them all along as honest citizens. The problem is your frustration doesn't translate into the hardened criminals getting rounded up. It translates into a different kind of game that's going to be used. You're building the weapon that's going to be used against you.
We also have the presumption of innocence in this country.
Right.
And another reason why we should not be watching mainstream news, people, please stop, turn off the mainstream news, listen to Solari, listen to us, listen to anyone else, because this is how we're going to learn. I'm like, I had no idea about what you're just telling me now. No idea.
Well, it's amazing because, Carolyn and I have talked about, we've seen some really smart people in the alternative media get tricked. And one of the reasons they got tricked is they don't know. I mean, I'm a former government official, and I have spent decades studying how the money works between federal, state, and local government, Carolyn too. And we know all the laws and regulatory tools, or many of them, that a government can use to implement things in a local place to stop the crime. Really stop it if you really want to, right? And so we know how to do that. And we know dropping in the National Guard or the military, that is show and tell. That is theater. That is not going to bring fundamental change in terms of those cities being successful.
Well, this has been a brilliant show. Thank you for educating me. Thank you for it all. I really enjoyed it. We're going to be back next week. It's not Meryl next week, is it? No, it's still us one more week.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to know more, go to Solari, everyone, and sign on up. And because this is ongoing, and then they just come and educate us here. But you really want to get into this, you need to go over to Solari. But to our viewers, thank you for watching and for your support. Stand firm, always stand firm, never settle, and pray big. And we will see you very soon. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Polly.
A typical developing normal, born at 38 months. He would, after the 2-month vaccines, I told the doctors, I said, hey, he got a fever. And they said, don't worry about it. Just start giving him Tylenol before he comes in and gets his vaccines. So I listened to what the pediatrician said. I went in and gave him Tylenol before any of the vaccines. He still would spike a fever. It had a lot of respiratory issues. Between 2 months and 12 months, and then at 12 months we went in and it was 4 vaccines. He got the Hib, MMR, varicella, and
that's what I got, people.
And the Prevnar.
Prevnar's a baddie. Oh, bad. Oh, wicked.
And then his next visit after that was, he had lots of diarrhea, and that was the next visit was less than 30 days later. Lots of diarrhea, irritability, and then I went in, and it was the whole thing in 2005. Where they really went hardcore press on everybody needs to get a flu shot. So I was like, well, I gotta get my kid a flu shot. I don't want him to get a flu, right? So I got him a flu shot about a month and a half after the MMR. And then it just was downhill from that. I was still nursing him twice a day, a morning feeding and an evening feeding, and all he wanted to do was nurse. He just wanted to nurse, and that's when the bad behavior started. He would open up cupboard doors and just start dumping. He was, using words, but then he lost all. I had a list of about 50 words that he had said. Mom and dad and dog, cat, and everything like that, and that all stopped. It just really all stopped. The doctors were like, oh, it's probably a hearing problem. Oh, we're not sure what it is. And then again, we had more respiratory issues. It wasn't until I started seeing a different pediatrician right before he turned 3, where he was starting to hand flap a little bit, and the different pediatrician walked into the office and said, you need to take him to a neurologist. And I was like, really? I said, well, I took him to have his hearing tested. I took him to another, I can't even remember what it was, and they were like, oh no, we don't see any signs of autism. But she walked in the door and she saw it right away. So, I'm really fortunate that, we didn't have seizures or, huge high fevers where, that the brain was injured. But it definitely has been a long journey, and we're definitely part of, I was part of the 5,000 court cases. I did the ombudsman. He definitely is isolated autism case, and it's been a long journey to get him back to feeling happy and smiley. But
it's a beautiful picture. That
yes,
he's a beautiful boy.
He also has PANDAS. His immune system is so messed up. 2011, he finally was diagnosed with PANDAS. For 2 years, I had been saying, I think my son has PANDAS. I think my son has PANDAS. He also has a ton of food allergies. He has the deadly peanut allergy. He's so paranoid and has a lot of anxiety about peanuts because I have had to use the EpiPen. He did stop breathing, and had to use the EpiPen, and he was hospitalized for a night because of a stupid peanut. So, but we just keep on keeping on and trying to work on his immune system, and trying to right that, and along with almost hitting puberty. Right, and he's getting bigger than me, and so, but it's a struggle, but it's a good struggle because he's very high functioning. So I'm really lucky. So he has a YouTube website, Super Cool Kid. If anybody wants to check it out,
What's his
he's got.
YouTube?
Super Cool Kid is his YouTube.
Super Cool Kid.
Super Cool Kid. He almost has 1,000 subscribers.
Aww.
So
that's great.
Yeah. So
fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
Some 40 to 70% of mothers who have children with autism believe that their child was injured by a vaccine. We should be listening to these mothers. We will perform the studies that should have been performed 25 years ago.
This is the most important thing. There's nothing more important than that.
This guy is staking his presidency on ending the autism epidemic, and he talked about vaccines.
We want no mercury in the vaccine. We want no aluminum in the vaccine.
We didn't know if he was actually going to touch on vaccines, and he was all over it.
There's no reason to give a baby that's almost just born hepatitis B.
He basically gave parents permission not to vaccinate their kids, and definitely not to take Tylenol.
We now have data we cannot ignore. There is a causal relationship between prenatal acetaminophen use and neurodevelopmental disorders of ADHD and autism spectrum disorder.
The truth is, vaccine injuries are real and they've been ignored.
Society does not want to acknowledge vaccine injury, period.
These childhood vaccinations, the people of America are telling us they are not safe and effective. We are seriously concerned at Children's Health Defense about the disinformation and misinformation out there.
The government has decided that this particular industry doesn't have to be liable to anybody.
There's only 10% of children are complying with the CDC's recommendation on COVID boosters.
A record number of kindergartners didn't get at least one state-mandated vaccine.
And the number of exemptions is up. Vaccination rates in children start to drop once again.
16-year-old girl wins in court after the public school system denied her medical vaccine exemption.
The nonprofit Children's Health Defense has championed her case.
Second dose is going to be going to
Health and Human Services is reestablishing the task force on safer childhood vaccines. This comes after a lawsuit from an advocacy group formerly led by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.